you.
Had it not been for the eternal presence of spirit, had it not been for communities which in the face of various forms of lockdown and imprisonment, division and repudiation, remain committed to creating and sustaining ceremony, sacred space, the project of demonization, erasure would have been complete. Had water not been indestructible, had streams so turgid been shorn of memory, had ocean relinquished her history, we would have been set permanently adrift, left to our own devices without benefit of a compass. What sadness. Had trees lost their vocation to whisper or humans their kin to decode the language of forests, we would have been rendered utterly speechless, committing tongue suicide, as Toni Morrison calls it. Had the curtain between the physical and metaphysical worlds been torn irretrievably, with no hope for mending, we would never have known how to thread the sacred needle. I am grateful to the spirits of this sacred land, to the spirits of our ancestors of light, those in whose footprints we walk and on whose shoulders we stand, those whose blood runs in our veins, whose names we may not know, or who we may have forgotten. I am grateful to you, and I ask your permission to speak. Greetings. Greetings to you, Alyssa, and thank you, I miss you too. Greetings to you, Binta, and the Executive Committee. Greetings to each of you gathered here to remember. When Audre Lorde addressed the graduating class of Oakland College in 1989 in Ohio, she looked out at their faces in the brilliant morning sun and saw her face reflected in theirs. I cannot see your faces, but I can hear you. Technology has granted us this temporary reprieve from distance, from isolation. It's a privilege. And yet, the world now is very different from the world that existed when you were first envisioning this conference, when you first put your heads and hearts together, stoking desire to form a graduate student union. Your decision to act collectively from knowing which side of the fence you're on and who is there with you, to mobilize the strength of your difference in the service of what you believe, as Audre would say, a quintessential feminist principle. Members of the Executive Committee, Sam, Ezra, Ferdy, Darlene, Binta, the task you have taken on to help us unmask and demystify the uses of power, sometimes hidden, sometimes hyper-visible, power that orders and disciplines our daily lives, be it in the form of the concentrated yet fragile power of sexism, homophobia, transphobia, racism, classism, colonialism, and ableism. That task has no doubt taken greater effort and assumed greater significance with this conference, and in this palpable determination of yours to build communities of solidarity, intellectual neighborhoods, Morrison calls them, when we most need them, to reach across, stretch ourselves towards each other, beyond borders of geography, only some of which, of course, have been rendered inconsequential by this current catastrophe, this pandemic. You have reached beyond borders to delve into the questions that have occupied you, that have obsessed you, that have kept you awake, that have frustrated and energized you, given you hope, or brought you to the shores of despair, as this moment invariably has been for many. Grief has crossed into the thresholds of our living spaces, forcing us to become intimate with the fact of our mortality. And there isn't anyone who has been free from the many terrors of now. This now, There are other nows, but for the moment, this now, when to speak for power carries greater weight, greater accountability, greater responsibility, greater humility in the face of this catastrophe. 4.6 million people infected with the virus worldwide, 189,000 in Canada, 1 million plus deaths worldwide. Those who have taken their transit without so much as a word of farewell to their loved ones. How will they return? The whole world has been affected and the future has arrived, Arundhati Roy says, on its own terms. That's our starting place today. It may not have been our starting place earlier this year, but it is today a starting place of recognition, a starting place of providence. When I asked the executive committee about the inspiration behind the vision for the conference, Sindra wrote back to me saying that your vision is inspired by the ability of women in gender studies, the discipline's ability to span the world in multiple ways, to world travel, as we said, Binta, took a phrase from Maria Lugoni, who herself has now transited. Over the course of the next 3 days of world travel, and of course thereafter, you will determine the ways in which your questions sit within WGSI, whether your questions are disciplined by your discipline of choice, or whether they are free to roam, to travel, though not as a tourist, to elsewhere, which may be right next to you. You will know when it's necessary to leave home intellectually, the transformative dimensions of roaming, when and how to return, that enigma of return that we're still at pains to figure out fully. As you know, we are not to use this metaphor to travel when there are approximately 25 million refugees of one part of Cherry Morada's term. There's wars, Afghanistan, South Sudan, Venezuela, Myanmar, and Syria. We are told that more than 50% of those fleeing are women and girls, LGBTQI people, elderly and disabled people. We are not to use this metaphor lightly when those who travel randomly are oftentimes made to feel the disproportionate sting of manufactured hate in the countries to which they flee, a hate they had no hand in creating. We are not to use this metaphor lightly when those who are homeless have been rendered even more homeless, when those who are forced to can be imperiled because home has become a place of danger, a place where domesticated violence against women has reached staggering proportions. Domesticated mirrors an abhorrent violence of state managers and state institutions. Paradoxically, this moment you have created for us to travel the world as we stay put can temper deep feelings of isolation occasioned by this catastrophe and provide ground for renewed connectivity and genuine inspiration in our determination to refuse the slide from social distancing to alienation. You have a full agenda ahead of you over the course of the next 3 days. You will tackle questions of global gender formations and identities, colonialisms within the metropolis, not a colonialism of the then and there, but a colonialism of the here and now. The effects of toxic discourses of heteromasculinity on display within the Brazilian state, and of course we know other states as well, including the United States of North America. And within practices of representation, you will look at familial and academic formations of Afro-Canadian men. You will look at resistance strategies of Black European women, women in war, the confluence of violence and agency. You will examine the ways in which hegemonic ideologies and practices radical spaces, the confluence of shame and anti-racism, for instance. Examine acts of memorialization as political acts. Question who is members and why. Those bodies, those people, communities positioned as not worth remembering, as disposable, selective remembering. You will examine the ways in which forgetting and silencing are practices of erasure, including those forms of silences that pervade the official archive. The archive may not be human, but it is alive and can therefore count as an antagonist. You will examine the politics of the very forms of aesthetic production, radical engagement with queer performativity. You will puzzle over whether militarization contains the erotic. You will puzzle over the meeting place of queer and the state, which is fundamentally anti-queer. The meeting place of the hypervisible theater with the forced invisibility of the closet. Armenian and Chilean women performing art, living activism, reminding me of the Sistering Theatre Collective of Jamaica. You will look at law as the meeting place of the transformative and the repressive. You will examine radical engagements with music. You will remix and redux, bring Black radical traditions of hip hop up against the doors of the White Academy. Cold War rebellion and the voices of girls, poetry, chutney erotic. Moten's Black speculative fiction, the queer politics of reproduction. You will peer into the digitized spaces that house and rewrite Hindu nationalism. You will show how the wounds of Irish women have a different kind of story to tell about Irish nation building. You will examine cultures of trauma, whether named or not. And you will take some time to look at affect, the dimensions of our material existence that is not purely secular. We'll look at nostalgia, visual reconstructions of fantasy, psychic elements of our daily living, cultures of trauma, again, whether named or not. You must tell me that I've not forgotten anybody. Altogether, you will have provided a thickly layered snapshot of our queer, gendered, racialized lives, the measure of lives lived consciously across a range of geopolitical sites and practices, across a span of time that invokes a past that is always already present. This is the very methodology that rests at the heart of feminist praxis that is transnational, weaving links between the particular and the global, making race and squatter colonialism, gender imperialism, sexuality, and the fiction of nation matter in mutually paradoxical ways, conjoining practices that appear bounded by binaries, materialistic temporalities, and spaces so that they constitute an ensemble. Destabilize that which hegemony has rendered coherent and fixed as truth, reassembling that which appears to be disparate, scattered, or otherwise idiosyncratic, foregrounding that which is latent and therefore powerful, absent. The purpose of this within and across praxis is neither to flatten difference or to make it disappear, but rather to foreground it and press it, to market commonalities and solidarities that constitute the very fabric of how we make meaning of this existence we call life, of who we are, what we do, how we love. You will have taken up as well the vexing questions of complicity, of corruptibility, James Baldwin calls it, the chilling reminder that dialectic is always in motion, that the shadow double exists, that there is no place free of contradiction, no place of innocence, that the practice of relationship making within interpersonal or institutional arenas, those practices are as contested and as messy as they are full of possibility. But antithetical or oppositional projects at their own risk of harboring and replicating traces of the dominance, even as they yearn for freedom. Surely it's not the kind of freedom that George Lamming reminds us, that trades freedom through gratuitous exploitation, but freedom for collective self-determination, drawing new maps outside of the mandate for conquest. We must return again and again, just as in meditation, that return to ground and breath, to learn that special commodity, to learn and be who we must become for ourselves, for one another. This work of becoming is ongoing. We can bring this same transnational feminist analysis to bear on this current moment. This virus is not chemical only. It has attached itself to the fault lines, the pathways of international capital, or disaster capitalism, as Naomi Klein calls it. And those pathways and fault lines are the very sites where power and structural inequities cohere. No area of the globe is untouched. No institution is untouched, including the University of Toronto. While the virus cuts across racial, class, and gender lines, it simultaneously cuts along those lines as well. It has not flattened gender and racialized disparities that determine survivability, who is most likely to live, who is most likely to die. Rather, it has amplified them, made them more visible. The two important things for us to remember here are overrepresentation and disproportionate experience. The experience of Toronto is no different from other metropolitan centers of the North. From Statistics Canada, racialized groups, Arab, Middle Eastern, West African, West Asian, Black, Latin American, South Asian, Indo-Caribbean, Southeast Asian peoples are overrepresented in COVID cases. An article about COVID and the decolonization of Indigenous people's health, written by Lisa Richardson and Alison Crawford and published in the Canadian Medical Association Journal, indicates that First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities in Canada have experienced overall lower rates of infection despite structural inequalities, which may be the result of the effects of communal protocols which have been put in place, as well as ceremony, amplifying and attending to what is sacred in living interconnectedly with Mother Earth. Overall in Canada, 50% of COVID reported illnesses occur in families who are not paid a decent living wage, families who are referred to as low-income households. This means, of course, families who are living in poverty. 30% of single mothers, 34% of First Nations women, 21% of racialized women, 23% of women with disabilities, 16% of women elders, all live in poverty at this very moment. It is different, yet similar to poverty of the migrant farmers and agricultural women workers in India, who make up between 30 to 50% of migrant workers, who worry less that they will die from coronavirus and worry more that they will die from poverty. According to the Transcontinental Institute for Research of the UN World Food Programme, 1 out of 2 people on the planet struggle with hunger. Sadly, we are standing at the confluence of at least 3 pandemics. The pandemic of hunger, the pandemic of the virus, which is exacerbating inequities of various kinds, and the pandemic of structural inequities born of racial capitalist need. The intensity of this now might well lead us to think that this moment is unprecedented. The epic scope of this immense tragedy might lead us to think that this is new, that it has never happened before. But it is not new. Do not be seduced by this fiction of dominance, that it is unprecedented. We must ask ourselves the question, when we mourn, which now are we grieving? Is it an ancient now or one of an unfolding more recent? We are creatures of history. Time is palimpsestic, each before weaving into what is to come, each path in this present, a spiral, some say, that is anything but linear. This means we live other nows, ancient nows, many of which still circulate within us, continue to live unprocessed. Which now are we grieving? The effects of these current structural inequities of this pandemic? Or is it the grief of something long past, of being dismembered, stored in our bodily memory, cellular memory? Is this memory of being thrown overboard or tortured, killed while alive? Or the grief of having our dignity trampled by evolution, conflating our status with disposability? Is this the grief of our earlier lineages that perished in the flood of 1918? 22% of the population of Samoa that had experienced successive waves of German, British, and US colonization was wiped out. The worst single case of the experience of the epidemic in the world. Or is it that of migrant workers in India, forced to walk miles to a distant safety that never materialized, a journey reminiscent of the partition? Or is it the panic and the pandemic of the disappeared women, indigenous women, trans and queer people, Madres de la Plaza de Mayo, grieving what we can't remember, forgetting so deep we do not know that we have forgotten, the suffocation from the stench of tyranny and toxicities we have been forced to live with? No, there is no normal to which we yearn to return. We, the abnormals, the collaterals in this never-ending catastrophe. The contemporary uprisings concern our lives. What would make one put their lives at risk when their lives are already at risk? The contemporary uprisings concern our recognition of one another. The contemporary uprisings concern our provenance. What more potent a metaphor, symbol and fact of the very difference between life and death? What more potent than breath? And therefore, we must insist on our, especially when Black Lives Matter is used as a floor to divide. Recognition and provenance require another kind of tangible, what we can call a reckoning and accounting. There are several modes of reckoning at the moment, but one published just this past month contains the city of Amsterdam that owned, in quotes, 1/3 of the Dutch colony of Suriname, one of its many, in quotes, possessions. A group of about 40 scholars posed two questions. One, in what way did the management of the city of Amsterdam, in cooperation with the population of Amsterdam, influence the nature and scope of involvement in worldwide slavery? And two, in what the Dutch involvement in worldwide slavery translated the policy and otherwise shaped the reputation, the standing and belief structures of the city of Amsterdam in the period of slavery and its aftermath? What does all of this mean for the current discussion of and apologies for the slavery past? Their conclusion: the Board of Amsterdam, the big state as well as the city government, directly, on a large scale, worldwide, and for a long time, was involved in the slave trade and in slavery. That past was in the Amsterdam of today. The petition is no error in grammar in these questions. It is intentional as a way to follow the innards of practices that are deeply ingrained, testing the facts of the unspoken. There is no past. There is no is unnecessary. And while understanding that much of this movement is prison, slavery, and mobilization against anti-Black racism, you also remember at Venn diagrams Andrea Smith commissioned more than a decade ago, showing us that the pillars of white supremacy stand on at least three interrelated systems of settler colonialism, slavery, and Orientalism. We know what it means to do principled, effective cross-border organizing. We remember and know what it means to build solidarities that are meaningful and long-lasting. As we continue to make sense of the structure, come through this or as Arundhati Roy calls it, not with baggage yet. As we speak, know that there is action beyond monuments to white supremacy will be toppled. Confederate members of the U.S. removed or renamed. This is not a worldwide count, to be sure. But the culture of extraction, labor, no, will be retained. Monuments to binaries, monuments to discipline who, where, and how we love, that seek to imprison the erotic, deaden our intimacies, those monuments too will be toppled. Know that we need a radical self-possession in order to pass through this portal, a radical self-possession that is rooted in collectivity. Know that we must create spaces to grieve, to mourn, spaces that are ancient and those of recent standing. We must create ceremonies. From the poem Audre Lorde, all I love are my people. All we love are our people. As we sketch new maps outside of the mandate for conquest, build new archives of healing, plant new medicines, revitalize old ones, as we design connectivities that will make our breathing possible again, that will make freedom possible again, let us know that there is a call to which we must also answer, a call to reunite to our purpose, to the promises we made before birth, when we were formless form, pure energy. Reunite with that purpose that will whisper in our ear the reasons that we came. That too we must know as freedom. Both are worthy, both are worth fighting for. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Jacqui. I wish you could hear everybody applauding.